Hi, so it's 101 on November 28th, 2018. We're going to get started with our next edition of our Great Leaders Build Great Leadership Teams webinar series. Excuse me. My name is Jack McGinnis. I'm a managing partner at Relationship Impact, and we are a management consulting firm that does one thing, and we think we do it pretty good. We work with the executive teams of growing companies to help them get their teams in shape to be able to scale effectively. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the course of the discussion. Just a couple notes on logistics. The first is that you'll see throughout the course of this presentation, I fill the presentation with a good bit of substance. So, you know, I kind of don't do a good job with PowerPoint 101 and there's a lot of meat in the slides. So I try not to read off the slides, but everyone will get a copy of the slides afterwards, and I hope it provides some good context for you. Number two, if you have a question and want to raise your hand during the course of this, just use the chat feature, and I'll try to do my best to get to your questions during the course of the discussion. If I don't, I will be sure to get to them at the end of the discussion. So with that in mind, thank you for joining us today. Today's discussion is a bit self-serving, I admit. The business case for engaging a leadership team coach is what we do. But we thought it would be a helpful discussion to help folks that are discerning whether they need a leadership team coach or not, and give our perspective, which is obviously, full disclosure, it's obviously biased. We think we offer a good alternative to helping teams develop capability they need to be as effective as they possibly can be. So with that in mind, let's get into it. The business case for engaging a leadership team coach. Discussion flow. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what great teams are. What does it look like? What does it take to build one? Talk a little bit about leadership team coaching and when does it make sense to engage a coach, and what does an effective leadership team coach do, and what are some of the tips for potentially selecting someone, again, from our perspective. And then we'll provide you a few resources as well. So first thing, from our perspective, in working with leadership teams over the course of our careers, but particularly when we formed a Relationship Impact 10 years ago, our experience, the characteristics of great teams have four distinct characteristics to them. Obviously distinct but related characteristics. The first is that there's an absolute focus on getting business results. That may be an obvious thing to some folks, but it's an absolute key to the best teams are really focused on what's most important and achieving the business results that they're set out to organize to achieve. Number two is what we call a force multiplier effect, but the team has great synergy to it. They have impact. It has impact way above and beyond the contributions of any one particular member, and that's another characteristic. When we see a great team functioning well, you can see them. They have each other's backs. They're anticipating needs, those kind of things. The other one that's really important, and you see it as teams evolve over time, is their capacity to address more complex problems, challenges that they inevitably face in a more timely, productive, efficient, effective manner grows. So, their ability to learn and grow is really important. And finally, the resilience is another key to a great leadership team. Nothing goes well all the time. There's no perfect situation. There's no perfect team that we've seen. There will be dysfunction at points. And it's, when you get adult human beings involved in stuff, there is definitely a penchant towards dysfunction. And when that happens, the ability for the team to get back on track, get back focused on what's most important, and in a productive way is really, really a key attribute. So focus on results, force multiplier effect, to be able to learn to deal with more difficult challenges over time, and resilience. And that, from our perspective, that's when we work with executive teams, that's what we're shooting towards. We're trying to get the team to have those characteristics, and a lot of work that goes into that. So what are the factors that enable team effectiveness? And so from our perspective, there's two sides of this coin of team effectiveness that are really important. The one side of the coin is focused on what we call structural factors, so those factors that help the team focus on the business outcomes that they're in business to achieve. Second is there's relational factors, or those factors that help teams develop a productive, healthy work environment. And structural factors are things like, does the team have a good sense of its purpose as an enterprise purpose for the team, distinct from the individual functional purposes that the head of marketing, the head of sales, the head of product development, what it brings to the table. So that do they have a sense for what their purpose is as a team? And it's very interesting when we start working with organizations. We often will ask this question, and we get a whole bunch of different answers, and which gives you a sense for. Oftentimes there isn't that strong sense of what we're doing together. What is it that we're supposed to be doing as a leader, a group of leaders together, distinct from our functional roles. Related to that, do we have the right people on the team? And sort of related to that, do people understand what their roles are, obviously functionally, but also enterprise-wise? Do they understand what their roles are as a part of the leadership team? Do we have a sense of how we're going to work together, how we're going to operate together? We call them operating principles, norms of behavior, whatever. But have we talked about it? We discussed those how we're going to work together. And do we have a sense for how we're going to meet and work together? Do we have a good management rhythm? A lot of the teams we work with, they have a good rhythm in place for meeting on strategic issues versus tactical issues. But most of the time when they're talking about strategic stuff, they dive and inevitably dive right down into the depths of talking about the tactics, or putting out the latest fire, and don't spend the time they need to on the strategic stuff. Another one that we don't have listed down here is meeting management. I know that sounds stupid, silly. It's obviously people know how to run meetings, but we find ourselves helping, not directing, but helping teams focus on how they meet. Do they have an agenda? Do they have a purpose for what they're supposed to be meeting on? Do they keep to the topics in the agenda, or do they drift? Do they make decisions, take action, and follow up, and write stuff down and follow up on those actions? So, long-winded way of saying, there's a whole bunch of structural stuff that goes into setting up a great team, and these are some of the things that we just talked about. On the other side of the coin is the relational factors. And this boils down to, do we have a good sense of collaboration on our team? Do folks work together well? Not so much do they like each other, but do they work together well? And from our perspective, it boils down to a few things. Number one, is there a feeling of trust in the team? Again, not so much do they like each other, but do they trust each other's intentions? Is there an ability to confront each other well, to challenge, to debate the most important issues that they're facing in a productive way? And obviously, we think that trust has a big influence on a team's ability to challenge, debate, argue well. And then finally, do the team members hold each other accountable? From our perspective, there's a few levels of accountability, right? There's individual accountability, there's boss or authority accountability, and then there's team accountabilities. And the best teams that we've worked with move to a place where team members are actually holding themselves accountable versus always having the boss to be the one that's holding accountable. So we talked a little bit about the characteristics of a great team. Now we talked about some of the factors that enable a team to be as effective as it could be. And now I want to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between the structural and the relational factors. There is it's sort of an inextricable link between the structural factors and the relational factors. So, for example, you could have a great structure in place. You could have a really clearly defined purpose. People that really clearly understand their roles functionally and enterprise-wide, and all of those factors that we talked about. But if you have bad relationships, you have lack of trust, you have an inability to confront well and hold each other accountable, that structure is somewhat suboptimized. And the same can be said for if you have a lack of structure and you start with good relationships. We see this in a lot of the young companies we start with. You have a group of folks and a leadership team that work pretty well together, and they get along and they generally like each other. But then lack of structure can contribute to some degradation in relationships. So very simple example of this, if roles aren't clearly defined, and I recognize that in startups and in young companies even, roles evolve over time and people do multiple things. But if there isn't some clarity around roles and the interconnection between roles, sometimes people can be pointing at each other. I thought you were supposed to do that. I was, I thought that was my role, and so people start making assumptions. So if lack of structure can contribute to a degradation in relational dynamics as well. So from our perspective, structural dynamics and relational dynamics are the keys to building a great leadership team. So now let's talk about some of the challenges, right? And there's some good research out there that suggests that actually this research has been updated. This research suggests that less than 12% of teams rate themselves as high performing. And I just saw another study in the Center for Creative Leadership that I'm not sure exactly what the percentage was, but it was similar to this. So there's a recognition that we don't, that our teams aren't as effective as they could be. Organizations often assume that employees know how to work in teams, and then by having a great leader, everything will be okay. And from our perspective, that's just not those first. It supports the first bullet, is that folks don't necessarily know how to work well in teams. It's beyond just being a quote team player and playing well and liking each other. There's some, as we talked about before, there's some structural issues and some relational stuff that needs to have some attention to it. And we see this last piece all the time. Leaders typically look to solve any team dysfunction by going to a structural solution. So we have our team just doesn't work well. So we jump to, well, if we got rid of Bob, all our problems would go away. Or if we just changed how we meet, all our problems will go away. Now, we're not suggesting that those things can't be helpful, because they certainly can be, particularly if you have a toxic team member. But if you haven't established the right structural foundation and built the trust and the ability for folks to challenge each other well, then you're gonna struggle with any structural solution, as we talked about in the previous page. So there are some challenges, and this all sets up the self-serving construct of why do you need why would it be helpful to have a leadership team coach? Okay, so what are some of the reasons that we see why organizations engage a leadership team coach? And as I talked about earlier, we work with the executive teams of growing companies, anywhere from $10 to $150 million. And in some cases, we're working with $1 billion company right now. And have worked with organizations much bigger than that as well. So, but these challenges of building a great leadership team are fairly consistent across organizations, at least from the perspective that we've had over the last 10 years. Okay, so when do you engage a leadership team coach? And I guess to start, it's really important to spell out that you don't need a leadership team coach ever. I guess would be one way to put it. But you do need to step back and focus on the structural and relational dynamics. And what I would argue is that if the dysfunction is getting bad enough, and again, I said earlier, every team has some dysfunction. If it's getting in the way of your ability to perform in an optimal way, then we believe that a leadership team coach can be a helpful conduit to help the team get back on track. So when leadership team dysfunction is getting in the way of performance, when the team leader recognizes that he or she is contributing to any leadership team dysfunction, right? We can't get engaged, obviously, as a leadership team coach if the leader doesn't have a level of self-awareness that suggests that he or she may be contributing to the problem, even if it's in a small way, right? And so that level of self-awareness is something we look for in partnering with the clients that we work with. And we've learned the hard way. If that's not there, then it's really hard for us to have any real meaningful impact. Next, when the leadership team recognizes that structural solutions alone are insufficient, and that's, we talked about that earlier in the slide before this. Structural solutions are important, but they are often insufficient. And finally, when their leadership team recognizes that it's got to go beyond team building and training, in the work that we do is very developmental. It's hands-on, it's practice. We're giving tools and techniques for how to become a better team, how to become a better contributor to my team. But what we really aren't is a team building, like rope courses and training on conflict management. That's not who we are and what we're about. We believe that really building a strong, great leadership team requires a developmental approach to building capabilities so that are sustainable for the team to thrive. So those are some areas of when to engage a leadership team coach. What does a coach do? There's a few roles that a team coach plays, right? We share executive level experience from, I've been the CEO of one company, a COO of another company. I've helped build many teams at a senior level, and I have some experience. Not all of it has been great, for sure, but I've walked in your shoes, and I have an ability to recognize what you and your team are going through. However, on the other side of that, though, is the oftentimes executive level experience can, from our perspective, can be a detractor. We view our jobs as team coaches not to provide prescriptive business solutions or this is how your business should be run, but to help the team come up with those answers and to help the team function in a way that can address the business challenges that it's facing. I've been a management consultant, and that part of my career was very much on providing some prescriptive business solutions. Executive team coaches, in our opinion, should not be focused on that. They should be focused on helping a team become as effective as it can so that it can address the business issues in front of it. Second, executive team coaches will have a model for building executive teams, a process, a methodology with proven tools and techniques, and most importantly, probably reference results, from other client systems. So there's a lot of coaches out there. They're executive coaches. That is not what this is about. This is a very focused on a team as a system rather than just any one individual on the team. Related to that, our role is not to be an advocate for the CEO or any one member on the team. It's to have the best interest of the team at mind. So this at heart, this probably is why our sales cycle is so long. We take a lot of time. We obviously are hired typically by a CEO, but we take a lot of time to build relationships with the members of the executive team through, and that's critical, because the worst thing we can be seen as a pawn for the CEO, because we really, our ability to help is suboptimized. And that's related to my fourth point, is that we serve as a non-biased third party with no agenda and no prescriptive technical business solutions. That's not what this is, from our perspective, what this is all about. And again, I keep saying from our perspective, because there are many ways to do stuff, and this is what we have found that has worked best for the clients and the systems that we've worked in. So that's what a leadership team coach does. And here I'll leave you with this last piece on some tips for selecting a leadership team coach. And there's basically three with a whole bunch of sub-bullets under them. Possesses relevant experience, deploys a pragmatic approach, and recognizes a role as a coach rather than a technical expert. Okay? So let's go to possesses relevant and referenceable depth and breadth of experience. So has led or been at least a member of a leadership team, so that he or she can empathize with the struggles and challenges and successes that a team goes through, right? It's really, I think that's an important thing. I mean, I've ran the turnaround of a light manufacturing company, and I tell you, the struggles and challenges and of going through that and building a team and maintaining a team through some very difficult trials and tribulations was a great learning experience for me. And I will admit that I didn't do it all right. There's no question about it. If I had to go back, I would do a whole bunch of things, or at least a few things a bit differently. A pragmatic approach is based on a sound theoretical construct. We try very hard not to bring the theory into the work that we do, but it is important that it's based on a strong theoretical construct. And what that basically means is that, if you're using an assessment instrument, for example, that assessment instrument has some reliability and validity to it, for example. So, and then it's focus on long-term development versus training or team building. Now, I talked about that earlier. We believe that development and capability and capacity building is huge, are huge, and that training and team building, while can be helpful, they're not sufficient for really building a great team. And finally, recognizing their role as a coach rather than a technical expert. It's really, the focus is on helping the team run effectively so they can manage the business effectively, not on helping the team make decisions or hire and fire people or restructure, those types of things. Challenge clients to re-examine their assumptions, methods, and approaches. That's a coaching role. An ability to build trust quickly and deeply, and an ability to have a thick skin, right? And to recognize that we're not always right in our observations, right? Those are important things. And lastly, the ability to facilitate and read a room quickly and help the team focus on what's most important from a developmental, not a technical perspective. So that is that's our webinar for today, for this month. It's a fairly short one. I hope this has given you some insights, at least from our perspective. And again, I've said it before, it's a very biased perspective because we're big believers in team coaches, or we wouldn't have a job. But really, I hope you've gained some insights from our perspective on how to select a coach. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I will send out a link in the next couple of days to the webinar and to a couple resources as well. So here's a few resources: The Business Case for Team Coaching by Team Coaching International, Leadership Team Coaching, Developing Collective Transformational Leadership by Pete Hawkins. He's kind of a guru of team development, and Senior Leadership Team Coaching by Douglas Riddle. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you next month at our next webinar.